Hi, everyone. This is Zara Altair, and this is the Midweek Zap. And I am so excited today. Our guest is Dr. Emmanuel St. Victor. Manny, I'm so happy to see you here today. And we are going to be talking about anxiety and taming that monster. So, Manny, tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm me. In 2008, I escaped from my psychiatry residency and took a sabbatical, and I haven't gone back. So I say I escaped from the loony bin. I went to Harvard undergrad. I went to Carolina for med school. In between that, I was lucky in that after undergrad in '95, I took a few years off to see the world, so I didn't have the standard pre-med mindset. After med school in 2003, I took a few years off to do software engineering and build virtual worlds, which again allowed me to unplug. And then in 2008, I jumped into internet marketing, software engineering, and again, virtual worlds, mainly because, as we were discussing earlier, I like the information, I like the thought process, and I like to be able to see the world from a lot of different perspectives to see my blind sides that were created by my culture. And by my culture, I mean medical culture, Harvard snob culture. And hopefully none of my Crimson folks are throwing stuff because I said that. But each culture that you jump into, you're somewhat indoctrinated by identifying with it. And a lot of my friends who spent their whole lives in the medical training pipeline have a certain way of looking at patients and even at people in different social classes where they're able to give you a lot of prescriptive advice, but none of it is really life experience because they haven't been able to, they haven't been through a lot of things. So when I pulled out, the intention was to actually live. So so that uh, so that I can help other physicians who are, there's a high physician burnout, high physician suicide incidents, specifically amongst psychiatrists and anesthesiologists, the two people working in consciousness. So by unplugging from that, I wanted to see what life was really about. And if and when I go back to traditional clinical practice, to shift that way of doing it so that I can help other people do it in a way that serves their patients instead of serving their trapped egos.
That's very noble, actually, Manny.
Thank you.
And I might also add admirable.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's impressive because that's a huge turnaround. And today we wanted to talk. You have a Facebook group. So for all of you Google Plusers, Manny's also on Facebook, and he has a group.
OFE, Overcoming Anxiety for Entrepreneurs. OFE.
I don't believe it. I never thought of it that way. Okay. Now every time I go there, I'm going to laugh.
Yeah. And if you go under Facebook/groups, the URL is Entrepreneur Flow. So it's easier to find than Overcoming Anxiety for Entrepreneurs. But it's OFE.
All right. Well, that's just a great basis. I love it. All I can think of is jazz in the 60s. Okay. So people do get anxious about business, or something comes up. They have let's say they have an important meeting with a potential new client, and people get anxious and they worry and they feed their head with all the things that could possibly go wrong. I'm just using that as an example. And oh my gosh. Okay, I'm going to bring this up, and then I'm going to ask you to suggest what people might do. But
Okay.
Wiwick says, leave the madness to live. This is great.
Hey, Vivek.
Yeah, leave the madness to live life. Boy, there's a good suggestion for anybody in any profession. Live.
Yeah.
So anyway, so let's start out with that. So all these feelings keep pumping, they just kind of jam in someone's head, and they're like, all the things that could possibly go wrong. And, they may send a sleepless night before the meeting, or, they review everything that they want to say, et cetera, et cetera. How can someone tame all those wild things that are popping into their head?
Well, the universal answer is to be present, to
Mm-hmm.
be in the here and now, because all you really have ever is now. When you're in the future, when you're in tomorrow, it will still be now. So a lot of times, you'll be like, okay, I'm now, I'm here, I'm now, is what I always like to think. Because when we think of concentration, we all, which is concentration is disrupted by anxiety. So how do you undo the disruption of concentration? Of anxiety? You concentrate. And that means you bring yourself to here and you bring yourself to now. Um, Here, physically, it just means being aware of the environment. Now means not being stuck in criticism, which has you trapped in the past, not being stuck either in worry, which is future tensing, and
Yep.
anticipation, which is still future tensing. Both worry and anticipation are stuck in the future where you can't do anything about it. You could either be worried or you could be um, looking forward to something. But what ends up happening is when you look back, you find there's a vacuum in the space where you were, because you weren't present, you weren't flowing, you weren't exchanging energy and using that time most effectively. Uh, the way you avoid that is you do what's called Neil Ford in the Now Habit calls it the work of worrying, where you get clear on how you want the thing to come out, the event to happen, and then you work your way back from that time to the present, listing two sets of things. What are the steps that you can take along the way to make sure that you get to your desired outcome? And what are the expected distractions? What's the worst that could happen? Everything from, my tie catches on fire in the middle of the presentation, the boss throws up, the boss gets nauseous because my background makes him sick. What you do is, and I'll put a comma there. Anxiety is uncertainty. So anything you can do to reduce uncertainty reduces your anxiety. So by thinking through the steps of all the things that could possibly happen, when you step to that meeting, you're not stepping to the unknown. You're stepping into a set of scenarios that you've thought through and you've experienced emotionally. And it's sort of a habituation therapy to your own successes and to your own failures. If the boss says something terrible, when you thought about what the worst thing was that could happen, there's nothing more clever than the worst criticism that you could imagine coming out of someone's mouth that's really ever going to come out of their mouths. So when you get there, you're like, good try, but I already thought of it. They're like, he didn't say
Yeah.
anything about my
So
mother.
I have a question. So how do you reconcile being here now present with running through that whole list of what could possibly be the bad consequence of the tie catching fire, or
Yeah. That's where when you have your memories and if you're in a safe place, then you're able to experience things. You're able to jump out of your own thinking. And that requires taking some time to, and this is through daily meditation, become aware of your own thinking. And you and I, last time we spoke, I spoke about the white room experiment, in which you
right.
sit in the room and you watch your thoughts come in and out. The benefit of becoming an observer of your thoughts is that you're doing what's called disidentification from ego. You're detaching from the stories that you tell yourself, and you're like, hey, that's a thought. Hey, that's a feeling. Hey, that's a thought. And you get into the habit of saying to yourself, I am having a thought that my boss said awful things to me. I'm having a thought that, and you can do all that. Now, once you're able to not be reacting to the thoughts catastrophically, overreacting and going way into scripted behavior, you're able to do a set of things. And one of them is when you're stuck in the past or you're stuck in present state, the way you feel, and you're not able to get out of your own head, That's ruminating. That's like you're sitting there. It feels as if there's nothing you can do to change the situation. It's dreadful. You're trapped. You're stuck. You feel a bit like the victim. You get resentful. That's ruminating. What you're supposed to do is step into the future mindfully, being aware that you're stepping into the future. So you're like, these are my thoughts, but you step into the future in the first person. Now, when you do that, you imagine the ideal future, but you don't do what's called doting. Doting is when you stick in the future and you don't come back to the present to do a comparison. Because where you really develop the benefit of staying present effectively is by programming your unconscious mind. You step into the future, and if you're worried about something, you ask your future self, and this is not magical, this is in your imagination. You have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation from the first person. I'm worried. I feel tightness in my stomach. I feel stress in my neck. My mouth is dry. My hands are clammy. And you write those down in a real concrete way, and then you say to yourself, why, and what are the steps I could have taken to avoid that? And then you're like, okay, now I've imagined the best outcome. What are the steps that I could do to get there? Now, when you've imagined those two outcomes, you anchor that state, you feel it, so that you have that target. Now that a goal is a goal state that has a feeling. Now you step back in time, you do what's called mental contrasting. You're like, what is the difference between me then and me now? Well, I'm prepared. I've gotten my extra pens, so in case pens run out, so that if that happens, I do this. I'm ready for his smart aleck comments. I know that he's going to complain about his coffee, and I'm not going to let it bother me. But all those things require that you do that delta, that mental contrasting, where you compare the two states. So it's the ability to do they call it prospective memory, to step into the prospective memory in the first person while you're in there, like I'm sitting there, dim the feelings, and then step back into the present while you're in a safe place. So it's about not getting stuck in the future, and then you get to the event and you've used up all your energy because you imagined the perfect event, but you never came back to the present state.
Ah, okay. So reviewing the possible negative things that could happen, and our mind will give us plenty of pretty big monsters. When you arrive at the event itself, it turns out that none of the things that happen are as horrible as the big monsters you imagined.
Yeah, and plus you've
So
set up details.
it's actually a calming exercise. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's part of it. The other part is that you set intentions to prevent a lot of the cataclysmic things from happening. And the way your brain works is anytime you make a choice, even if it's a choice that sucks, there's something called choice-induced preference, where your brain gives you a little dopamine spurt every time you do something. If someone tells me to do the laundry, I'm just picking that as a random thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Notice how I checked over my shoulder after I said that. if someone tells me to like get something done, the when you take away someone's autonomy, you eliminate the intrinsic motivation, the desire to do it. Whereas if a person says to get something done, like say do the laundry, and I do a quick check in my brain where I do a little future casting where I say, okay, I say something clever instead of doing the laundry, and then we have an argument and I'm chilling on the couch, then I back up and I'm like, let's run that scenario again. And then I run a scenario where I do the laundry, and then I step back and I choose to do the laundry. Because I've gone through those scenarios, even if it was in a split second, I've created choice. And anytime you create choice, you create a positive valence and a sense of agency in the action.
I
So,
I totally agree. The choice is freeing.
yeah.
I just wanted to bring up some comments here. Roland Takaoka says, "All there is now." Perfect, Manny. And and then Kristen Drysdale has an amazing one. She said, I had a dream that I woke myself out of just prior to this show, in which I was speaking at an award show hosted by Oprah. I completely croaked on my dream. My takeaway: during a moment of anxiety, wake up.
Does that mean become more like return to consciousness during anxiety and jump out of your story? Is that what she's saying?
I don't know. I can't speak for Kristen, so Kristen
Yeah,
will
no,
have to answer that
yeah.
question. Yes. So I really like the choice-induced preferences that you talked about. Um, and I know we were talking in the green room, with the programming that you're doing right now and the programming that you have done in the past. And I am going through this amazing new experience of writing the story for a text game adventure. And one of the challenges for me as the story writer is to create situations where if the player makes a choice and it seems like a safe one, it can be the wrong choice. I mean, it's not going to, they're going to stumble or hurt themselves or something. Whereas if they'd gone ahead and, taken the other path, or, pulled out the dagger and actually engaged in a fight, they would actually be more successful.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's something to think about when we're doing that, the future, the looking at the event in the future, is to make sure that while we're imagining the most terrible things that could possibly happen, we're also thinking about the best ways that we can make that presentation, or the most efficient way to even do the laundry. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like imagine for the best outcomes so that, well, that's the benefit of thinking is planning. The benefit the benefit of looking forward to something is you can prepare for it and then you can do a set of responses instead of reactions.
Yeah. Do you want to elaborate about responses and reactions? I think that more clarification would help people.
Yeah, when you go into fight, flight, freeze mode, you react. Your brain kicks stuff over to your, your your basal ganglia, which is the part of your brain that runs a bunch of scripts. Uh, it's the kind of thing where it's autopilot. Uh, and the bad thing about it is it's very rigid, and it's not goal directed. It doesn't lead you to your outcome. It's say you went into a room to have a conversation with someone about something, they trigger you, and 10 minutes later you never get to have the conversation because you had a whole conversation about anger, about something entirely unrelated. Now, what you want to do is when you have to make a choice, you're supposed to use two things. And there's a habit of checking your self model. If in your self model, when you have a stressor, a, a choice or a challenge, you want to check two things. You want to check your core values, and you want to check your strengths, which are your attributes. So self attributes and self values. When you make a decision based on your core values, that decision ends up aligned with your purpose and heads you in the direction of your desired outcome. So in the middle of an argument, when you're able to activate your core values, you're able to realize that you're in scripted behavior, and you're not creating your desired outcome, and you're reacting, you're an autopilot. Um, then when you want to pick how to approach something, you've decided, okay, this is the outcome I want. What are my best tools to do that? Then you refer to your self attributes and you attack the problem with your strengths, and you surround yourself with friends who are able to who are strong at the things that you're weak at. None of that happens if you're in reactive mode, because in reactive mode, what you tend to do is you go into what's called shadow function, where anyone that has a strength that is one of your weaknesses, because you saw your weakness in someone else, you, instead of thinking cooperatively, you go into scarcity mode, you go into scripted mode, and you're having this negative reaction to the person being themselves instead of allowing them to be part of the strength of your group, if that makes any sense. You project your self-criticism onto the other person. You know, someone, if you're a concrete thinker and one of your team members comes up and they happen to be a more abstract, intuitive thinker, you might be like, well, get your head out of the clouds, when indeed half the problems that you're going to solve on your journey are going to require a more abstract forest instead of trees point of view. Or if
Yeah.
someone is more an emotional person and you're more of model-based pragmatic person, there's going to come a time when you're going to need a leader that is more in touch with the group and less in touch with the model, or vice versa.
Okay, thank you very much, because I think that's a very important distinction, those gut reactions. So we're getting lots of comments, so I'm going to bring some of them up, right?
Okay.
There are a lot. So Roland once again says, there are always infinite possibilities. Some results we refer to as miracles. I love that.
I like that. Yep.
Yeah. So thank you, Roland. That was great. And then Kristen, in reply to your question, said yes. Now I can't even find it, but yes, the wake up. She said yes. That's pretty much it. Manny sent Victor. And whoops, now I've lost Kristen. But I wanted to bring up Christine. Hi, Christine. When you take away someone's autonomy, you take away their motivation to take action. Love that, Manny. I do too. I just, and I also think that's extremely important in off-topic child rearing.
Yeah.
Is giving people their autonomy. And Manny, I'm going to let you talk because I've totally screwed up my, there we go.
There you go.
I clicked the wrong button and I couldn't unstick myself. All right. So, what other things can people do? There's also, there's also not a specific meeting or a specific task, but there's also this general sort of free-floating anxiety about I'm never going to make it. I'm stuck here forever. A lot of, for people who are creating their own business, even if it's in growth mode, those thoughts can come in, I'm always going to be stuck. I'll never scale up, or whatever it is. So let's talk about those, because those are biggies too. We talked about, an intense, specific, anxiety-producing event that is coming in the future or is happening right now. But there are also those general questions of, for people who are in business, or even employees. It's like, did my boss really mean what he said he meant, what he said? Or, is there some secret, something I'm not getting, that kind of office politics stuff. So, and those can be ongoing and very disabling. So I thought we could talk about that.
Yep. To me, the presencing is the solution to that as well, because anything that's triggering an anxiety is either because you're stuck in the past and you're perceiving yourself as not able to make choices, which coming back to present handles that, or you're stuck in a predicted outcome or an interpretation that you're basically imagining. You're stuck in your imagination. You're stuck in a story. The way to pull out of a story is with empirical data, and that sounds, that can sound cold and calculating, but at the end of the day, you want to do what we call in therapy collaborative empiricism, which is where you find someone you trust and you ask them WTF. You're like, okay, did that situation look this way to you? And then you actually listen to the feedback you get from that person. And that's why you want to be surrounded by people you trust, because if you're surrounded by toxic people, then they're going to gaslight you and you'll end up just way off the side of the road. But you want to, at any given point in time, you want to make sure that you're following a hero's journey instead of spinning in persona behavior, which is 3 types of persona behavior that we use in organizational psychology are victim mode, villain mode, and hero mode. Victim mode, there's a whole bunch of sub-elements, but it's sort of a disempowering, learn helplessness, a sense of weakness, help me. You feel as far as getting something productive done, you go through rituals that aren't necessarily going to get you any closer to your KPIs. You know, and it won't score you any points. In hero mode, you're doing heroic looking stuff, but you're more tending to the ritual, to your ego of looking heroic than the end outcome that the group gets. And when you're in villain mode, you're persecuting a victim. You're looking for someone to blame or shame, someone to kick out of the tribe, someone to make feel worse for human mistakes they've made. All three of these are less productive than a problem-solving mindset, which is embodied by the hero's journey narrative, where the hero's journey, basically, once again, you figure out what the problem is, you figure out what your values are, which the easiest way we do that is we activate our own myth. Like if you identify with Superman, then do some Superman stuff. If you're a utility belt Batman type of person, you channel your inner Batman. If you're more of a spiritual person, you go to what would Jesus do? You know, it's basically channeling the mythic character that embodies and enacts the set of values and attributes that you see, using that story instead of one of those three disempowering stories to head towards your goal.
Haha, I love it. You know, in the mid 80s, I'm just going to tell a little story here. In the mid 80s, I had a wild, crazy idea. I have plenty of them every day, but I had this thing. It was like the Institute of Applied Mythology, IAM. And, you know, it was just that. Whatever your mythology is, use it to go forward. You know,
Yeah, I like that. I am.
Yeah.
That fits presencing a lot.
Yes, it does. So let me bring up some more things because people are really engaging here. Sheila Hensley says, a leader more in touch with the group rather than the model. Brilliant, Manny. Working with a situation like that right now. Thanks,
Hey,
Sheila. Sheila's always spot on. And then Peter Hatherley, our wordsmith. Anxious and noxious are intrinsically linked linguistically.
And I see that now. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
There's a reason for that. There is a reason for that. Yeah, because when you come across someone who has a toxic anxiety, the thing is that anxiety involves rapidly clamping down to get a sense of meaning, especially if you're neurotic. A neurotic person prefers clamping down on the negative outcome than the uncertainty of the outcome, the waiting for the real outcome. They'd rather label you as something negative instead of wait to see you show yourself. They'd rather sabotage a relationship. They'd rather sabotage the outcome. They fall into self-fulfilling prophecies. It's easier than dealing with the unknown for them, because and that's where I said, imagine the worst possible outcome, because then you have some bottom line. So a neurotic person, or basically a highly anxious person with a certain degree of pessimism, brings a contagion to the group. And when other people are trying to be flexible, they attack that flexibility sometimes, if they're not self-aware, with a certain amount of toxin. You know, they'll label the person who is trying to move things forward irresponsible, too abstract, head in the clouds, too cheery, too optimistic, rose-colored glasses. There's various things that once you're able to own your own values and own your weaknesses, you're able to step back and say, okay, guys, this is uncertain territory. I'm going to STFU and let someone else drive, you know?
Yeah, that's great. And then Wiwit says, bring this up. Blaming means you give away your power to improve things.
Yeah.
I agree. Autonomy is useful only when one does not start blaming.
Exactly. And to me, that's the case. Once you go into blame or shame behavior, blame is contempt, and contempt is when you've filled up with so much toxin inside of you, so much shame, that you've hit the level of toxic shame, it overflows, and you go from internalizing to externalizing. You point a finger, because instead of thinking to yourself, what could I have done? It's easier to say, it's your fault. Then you go into victim or persecutor mode. Yeah.
Yeah. And victim persecution. Um, the victim is kind of a buzzword, so I like to stay away from that, especially when talking with people. I like to really avoid that word and look at the situation. What is the situation? Describe that situation to me, right?
Yeah.
And then how does that make you feel? Walking them through. I think, Manny, you know this. I was the sole 24/7 helpline for a group for about 4.5 years. And I really had to learn how to get people into the present who were way out there.
Yeah.
Way out there. Um, because sometimes people do need immediate physical assistance.
Yeah.
Immediate physical assistance. And you need to clarify for yourself and for them that that is the state of urgency of the situation, or to walk them through looking at it so that they see it's not as urgent as it seems, they are perceiving it. Peter Hatherley says, now is the place where the action happens. What we do now can effectively reduce the effect of the past, and obviously now affects your future. Toxics relates to noxious too.
And the thing I love about when Peter's around is like I look at my words differently, and I'm looking at toxic, noxious. I'm like, I never thought of it like that. Yeah.
I know. Peter's just great. It's just like this whole vision of the universe through words. It's really wonderful. And everybody here, if you're not following Peter, you should, because you're going to get that vision. And then Christine again says, wise words. We read, blaming means you give away your power to improve things. I agree. Autonomy is useful only when one does not start blaming.
Exactly.
Christine, I think I'd even take that farther, in that if you're blaming, you're not really in an autonomous state.
Yeah. You're dropping into one of your scripted behaviors. You're in persecutor mode. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, one thing is, I've partnered with Brendan Marshall Havner, the spiritual smartass, and we're managing the Overcoming Anxiety for Entrepreneurs Facebook group together. And one of the things we've come up with, if you join us over at the group, is we just posted it today. It's a PDF file that explains under each of the three positions on the drama triangle: the victim, the villain, and the hero. Usually that's all you get, but when you do the research, you realize that there are personas under each of those. And various psychologists like Jung broke down these scripted personas, like the martyr, the cheerleader, the what are the different forms of the hero, the superstar, and each of these, the analyzer. You have all these different people that, when you look at the specific roles, instead of, like you said, just saying abstract victim, when you see the specific roles, you're able to recognize, hey, I'm doing this thing. And when you're able to catch yourself doing those things in the present, then you're able to say to yourself, let me turn my attention to my values, and so that I can become a producer in this situation, so I can be creative in this problem solving, instead of being so focused on licking my own wounds. So by joining that group, I'll put the link in the comments, so in case anyone wants to join us over there. But we just shared that document today.
That's really lovely. That's really lovely. It is like, your story of yourself is based on your core values, and the role that you take is actually many roles. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
I know Manny gets this, but I'm hoping the audience is getting this too. Is that it's just like, because I'm a story writer and written film scripts and stuff. And when you're creating a character, they aren't all one thing. So even your villain, as it were, is going to have some things that resonate with the story reader or the audience in a way that is positive. And so when we're looking at ourselves in that same way, what are my different roles? I am a combination of these three right now in this moment.
Yeah.
But, earlier this morning when I was hanging out with the cats, I was this. So, being consciously aware of who you are in that present moment is really important as well. And I think that's especially true in business. I still want to keep this kind of a little bit business oriented.
Yeah.
Is
No, it's super true in business.
yeah, it's like being aware of not only the roles that you have, but what are the other people in the group, or the one other potential new client. How do they see your role? Are you showing them your role clearly? And the only way you can show them that role clearly is for you to be totally present in that moment in what you are doing. I'm going to say that what you are doing is the role.
Yeah. Yeah. And even a step further, who you are being in that moment, how you're showing up. Now, a useful resource for that is Christopher Vogel, The Writer's Journey.
Mm-hmm.
What he does is he extends Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, and he points out all the archetypal behaviors. And what he does in that book is he refers to the personalities that you come across, the archetypes that you come across on your journey, as energetic patterns. And that's what they are, because you activate a certain energetic pattern in your brain, and and this is again identifying with your brain again, you fall into that story. When a situation happens, if your brain activates angry, and sometimes even if it just activates a tightness in your gut and you infer from it, you jump to the conclusion, I'm mad. You're scanning the room to make an attribution. I'm mad. You're it. They kill the messenger, And so one of the things that Vogel does in his book is he explains that when you're problem solving on your hero's journey, that there are these different phases. When you make the commitment, yes, I've crossed the threshold, you're supposed to cross the threshold on symbolically either a boat, a little skiff, or one single bridge. Both of those represent your strengths, your attributes. That's what that's a reminder of. Then you're going to go through the road of trials. You're going to make allies. You're going to meet a trickster that's going to lead you to different ways and new awarenesses. So these are all energetic patterns that as you're walking through stuff, nothing exists outside of your head, and nothing that you don't recognize exists. So if I walk into a room, there's a kabillion things in there, but the only things that I will walk out of that room having remembered are the things that map to schema that I have in my brain. I'll walk in, I'll be like, there was a pot because I recognize pot. There was a chair because I recognize chair. You're not gonna walk out of there and be like, there were a couple of protons hanging out at a 3-degree angle relative to an electromagnetic field, because that's not what you do. When you make yourself aware of the victim patterns, when you make yourself in parallel aware of your hero's journey, the monomyth, and the different archetypes, then when you're in a situation, it triggers that recognition pattern at the same time as it triggers a villain pattern or a victim pattern. And you're like, okay, I'm angry, I feel cornered. And then you say to yourself, okay, I can do victim things. I can go passive aggressive. I can go resentful. I can sabotage the project. I can decide that I've had enough and have an explosive episode. But I can also flip to my mythic, channel my inner myth, and say, okay, shift frames of reference. If instead I want the desired outcome, what can I do? And then you give yourself a pair of choices, and you give yourself a split second before exploding to make the right choice. You make a core value based choice based on your strengths.
That's an explosive episode. I'm just speaking of words. That's That's an amazing one. In our family, when the kids were little, we used to call it having crank spits.
I've been there.
It's like, woo!
Been there, yeah.
Out there and gone. Manny, I cannot believe it, but we are coming to the end of our time. Do you have some last words to share with everyone before we go off air?
I think I've said a lot.
You have.
Yeah, I'm okay if I stop talking now. Yeah.
All right. All right. So I want to thank everyone who was here today. I loved all the comments, and we brought up maybe a quarter, if that. So thank you so much for all your participation. Zapsters rule. Thank you so much. And we'll be back next month.
Thanks,
Thank you
Sarah.
very much, Manny.